My name is Ron Wyborny. I was an HN, or hospitalman in the Navy, after a change of rating halfway through. Spent 5 years and enjoyed it very, very much. And my story started truly when I was 6.5 years old. I listened to the bombing of Pearl Harbor. My parents had to have a blanket over their head because of the fact that we were in blackout in California, not where I'm from, but that's where we were at the time. And the Civil Guard was told that they should shoot any lights out on the house at night. So at night they would bundle 2 of us kids up, put us under the bed with blankets and pillow for the blackouts, and we would sleep there for the night. My father was in the military. He joined in 1943. He was in the Navy, and he was an electrician's mate stationed in Italy. So I had a good representative there to become involved with. When the war started, I was sent back to live in Iowa, where we were from, and I lived with my grandparents during the war. We farmed, and so it was very quiet on the farm, but plenty of food, and rationing was going on, of course, but we were there. When I graduated high school, I had made a choice to join the Navy at that time. Patriotism was a lot higher at that particular time. And yes, we still have patriotism. I wish we had more patriotism. But here again, it's not taught in schools as to what has happened in the past. And I do think that when you don't know history, you tend to repeat history. And that's been said by somebody very much. Anyway, joined the Navy, got out of high school, graduated, and joined in September of '54. Sent to the Great Lakes Naval Training Station. It was becoming winter there, and even though I was born and raised in Iowa and Minnesota, that was the coldest place I've ever been in my life, in Chicago, outside of Chicago. And it's interesting because I was going back on my timeline, and I finished my basic training boot camp on December the 2nd. So on the 3rd, I'm sure it was on the 3rd, that they turned me loose to head to California, but I had leave in the meantime. So when I got to California, it was quite interesting. Oh, I have to back up on that somewhat. As you are going through boot camp, you go to counselors who help you to try and decide what you want to do in the military. Unfortunately, my counselors were bosun's mates, and so I don't know how much they knew about the upper Navy, but with my grades that I had, I could have any school in Class A that I wanted. So I told the fellow I want to be a corpsman, I want hospitalman. Oh yeah, that school was closed, which was not true. I found out later. But not knowing anything else, I said, well, what do you recommend? Mistake number 1. He said, well, general duty. And I said, well, what is general duty? Could be anything. Well, it turned, and I don't mind where I ended up, but it was a destroyer out of San Diego. So I went aboard the destroyer on December the 23rd. I had to be there by then. And it was late in the evening. And the petty officer of the deck was a first-class radarman. And so right away he tore my orders open, and he looked at my GCT. He said, oh, you want to be a radarman? I said, what's a radarman do? Well, he explained it. He said, well, in the morning I'll take you up there and you can see. So, of course, I got up. When you go to X Division aboard ship, you get up quite early because you're going to scrub the deck and get that all ready. Well, I think I was scrubbing the deck. Anyway, he came out and he said, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm doing what I was told. No, come on, we'll go up to the radar shack. So he took me up there, and they have their own coffee mess and all of this. So he's explaining everything to me, and about 11:30 he said, you better go back and muster in with the X Division, which I did. Well, after this went on for about 3 days, he said, well, what do you think? Do you want to be a radarman? I said, yeah, that's fine with me. So they sent me to school for that. And we then proceeded to go to Westpac, of course, which is what destroyers are made for that side of the world anyway, and this side too. And it was a 6-month Westpac, and we did a lot of different things. That particular cruise, we actually did mostly the Formosa Straits, which we're now doing again. Taiwan now, of course, but it was Formosa at that time. But got to see a lot of things, Japan and a lot of different areas, and returned to the States. Non-essential work done during that particular time in the States. Then we made our second cruise, and it was a goodwill tour from the northern tip of Japan down to Bangkok, Siam. Well, it was Thailand now, but it was Siam at that time. And enjoyed radar, had no particular problem with it. A lot of watches. You stand 4 on, 4 off, 4 on, 2 off, you dog the watch and such. Well, I went down to my bunk on that second cruise, and it was before calculators. That's how old. And sat down, and if I would stay in radar, I would have had 1,400 watches, if I remember right, to stand. And I said, no, I can't stand many more watches. So I put in a letter I talked to the division officer and then put a letter into the executive officer and went through the chain of command and asked to go to Class A school for hospital corpsmen. And so the Bufords finally sent the Bureau of Personnel finally sent the orders back saying, if I were to extend an extra year and go 5 years instead of 4, that they would let me have another Class A school. So I did, such as they asked, and ended up going off the ship in February of '57 and going to Balboa Naval Hospital for corpsman training. Great schooling there. And we did train Air Force medics there also, so we had quite a crew. Finished Corps school, and of course you go to different services to determine what you want. Well, between thoracic and psychiatric and all that, I didn't really choose that. But I ended up in eye surgery and eye clinical work in the eye clinic. And that turned out to be fantastic. I also became a ham radio operator about this time. And when I got stationed at the Balboa in the eye clinic, we had a particular patient come in who was a dependent, and it was my wife's mother and needed eye surgery. And I was a scrub technician, and so I scrubbed her surgery, which means I passed instruments and set up the pack. Well, this young lady used to bring in her mother for follow-up post-ops. And then we did the other eye. We did both eyes, didn't we? And Her father, however, was a retired officer. And being enlisted at that particular time, you didn't cross this border. So the doctor I worked with, one of the doctors, he said, "Ron," he says, "that's the girl for you." I said, "Well, I've already figured that out." But so I carried her name with me. Oh my goodness, for a year and a half, I think. And I finally got a hold of a ham radio operator in Long Beach. And so I put through a phone patch, which is a ham radio equipment, and I asked her for a date. Well, that's 62 years ago, so.
Still together.
And then I was going to be getting out in 59, and I had already decided I needed to move to Long Beach, of course. Mm-hmm. So I was going to go to college in Long Beach, which I did. But let's see, what did I do? I asked one of the doctors that I worked with. We had 9 corpsmen and 6 residents in the eye clinic. Well, they had a particular book called the Red Book of Ophthalmology. So I looked at that book and I picked out 3 ophthalmologists that were listed in Long Beach. And I made appointments with them and did interviews for jobs. Well, actually, it turned out the first one I interviewed with. He hired me right away. He said, "Well, when can you start?" And I said, "I get out this day." So I got out one day and started with him the next. Well, it turned out that he had been a line officer in the Navy. I don't remember the years he was in, but he had resigned his commission and gone to medical school and became an ophthalmologist. So I worked with him for 26 years, and actually it turned out then that he was a roommate of Jimmy Carter. So one of the highlights of this particular situation was that he wanted to do a cocktail party for Jimmy for his first one in California when he was running. So he asked all the staff of our office to be there to help out and do this. Well, I had a 55 VW, hand-painted, aluminum bumper, and he said, "Well, I want you there an hour early." I said, "Okay." So as I'm driving up to his area that he lived in, the Secret Service, of course, was all over that area. And they had cleared out this area in front for the limousine. So I was not going fast, but I could see this Secret Service agent watching as I'm coming down the street because he thought, "God, there's got to be a hippie or something." And as I got close, I could see the doctor mouth the words, "It's all right, he works for me." So I was able to go to the first cocktail party for Jimmy Carter. When I finished up, and so I started that in 59. The next 53 years, continued working in the same field the military had taught me. I worked with, I think, 4 different doctors over that period of time. Enjoyed every day of it. And
But you need to go back to the Navy.
oh, okay. You say so.
It's his life story.
Oh, the Navy itself, the time aboard the destroyer, we had a small amount. It's not a big crew on a destroyer. I think a wartime complement is 180. I don't know where they put everyone, but 180. But I think we had 105, if I remember. While I was aboard, before I went to corps school, they put me in my own little area. I was called a striker for a hospital corps, which means that I'm out of radar now. I'm working in sick bay. And I hadn't been to medical school, corps school yet. However, the doctor, the chief that I worked under, unfortunately was an alcoholic. So every time I'd go to get him for help, he was passed out in his bunk. So I learned an awfully lot using a Merck manual before I went to corps school. So by the time I got to corps school, I'd already had some injection into the field of what I was going to do. But I have...
Did you put soda?
Oh, yeah. While I was a striker aboard ship,
Put the camera on you.
they brought this fellow up. He had been on the gun mount for training on the 5-inch guns. Somehow he had gotten his hand in the breech when it went shut. And his hand was actually like a tomato as far as its jagged openings. Well, I had never sutured before. I knew where the sutures were at, but I had never sutured. So I cleaned the wound as much as I could, and I put sulfa in the wound. And unfortunately, he was in shock with his hand, so I had no anesthesia. I couldn't get at the anesthesia. It was actually the local anesthesia. So I actually had to sew the wound without any anesthesia in it, and got him all taken care of and sent him into the bunk. And actually, would you believe, fortunately, through God's will, no tendons were broken. No, there was nothing, no bones broken in the hand. It healed beautifully.
Wow.
And it wasn't me. It was that. I'm trying to think of other...
Stories down the...
Oh, in the eye clinic, we took care of a lot of Marines out of Camp Pendleton, which you saw many, many interesting cases this way. But I was at the reception area on this one particular day, and the door to the elevator opened. And here's a Marine being held up by 2 other Marines on the side of him. And here's this piece of steel sticking out of the area there. Of course, that was immediate surgery we had to take him into, and I went in to scrub that surgery. It was so fortunate because I don't understand machine guns, and evidently there's a bolt in the machine gun that is under a high pressure, and it has to be dismantled a certain way. Obviously, this individual didn't do that, and the bolt blew out, went in against the bridge of the nose and into the eye. It stopped just shy of the brain. The doctors we worked with, that I worked with, really were pretty good doctors, pretty fantastic. And they went in and they were able to get that out. It did affect the muscle of the eye, which we had to work on, but it did not affect the vision of the eye or the brain at any point. And he walked out 3 days later and went back to duty. Or not to duty, but limited duty.
Wow.
So,
Well, were you mainly on a base, or were you ever doing being actually on a ship?
I was 2.5 years on the destroyer.
On a destroyer?
Yes.
So did you have action on the destroyer?
Well,
oh my gosh.
The only really, I was in at the end of the Korean War.
Okay. And
the only real action that we were even tentatively involved in, we were in Manila Harbor, the 4 destroyers, our squadron, and we got sealed orders to leave the bay and go out and meet an aircraft carrier out further. And these were sealed orders, so...
Right, so don't tell me if it's a secret.
Well, the only thing I would say is that we were involved in Vietnam long before Vietnam. We were taking photos, is what we were doing. So they sent it, and
Were
because
you,
I
were you able to say that? I mean, were you able to say
oh
that?
yeah, well,
Okay.
that some things are debacles anyway, and that that might be one. But anyway, having been in radar for let's see how long that took, about a year and a half before I became a striker. I knew all the staff, the sailors up there, so I was allowed to go in and out because they cleared me for all the clearance I needed. So I went up, and it was very obvious on the DRT, which is the Dead Reckoning table, where we were headed. It was Vietnam. They said that they expected air retaliation. So as we got at a certain distance, they sent a gunship off the carrier plus a photo ship. And at that time, we all turned and headed back the other way. And we did have to wear flak equipment on the deck and such, but no, we did not get in any confrontation at all.
Okay. Yeah. Well, being in the hospital, you were the side that had the injuries,
Oh,
and
it was really, I think, my time in the hospital corps. Well, not only did it set me up for 53 years of employment
right.
after I got out, but it was just, other than seeing things that you couldn't fix, it was just really enjoyable. So I have no regrets in the military. Would I do it again? Yeah, but they won't take me anymore.
Oh, come on. They'll definitely take your wife. Oh my gosh. Well, we're yeah, do we have any You're too funny. I should have had a camera on you as well. So, okay, well, did you want to add anything else?
Well, certainly, as I say, my father was in during World War II, and then her father being in for 20 years for us, they gave him the commission of Chief Warrant Officer during the war. He was stationed on the USS Phoenix. So he was in Pearl Harbor during the bombing. They got underway. He was a boiler tender. They got underway and they were following the Nevada out. Nevada got hit with torpedoes and it beached itself. They beached that. So the Phoenix had to turn around and sail back through this and out the other way. They got out without a scratch, which I thought was great.
The Belgrano.
Oh, and of course, I don't know that everyone would know, the Phoenix was sold after the war to Argentina. And then Argentina decided that Grenada belonged to them, and yet it's a piece of Britain, is what it amounts to. And so they went to war against Britain for that. Well, our brother-in-law, who is English.
But you gotta say the Belgrano.
Why? Well, yeah. Sorry.
Has this been the hardest campaign?
About.
I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
Not really. Anyway, they sold the Phoenix to Argentina, which renamed it Belgrano, the Belgrano. Our brother-in-law in England, her sister is married to, was over here in the States at that time, and they were traveling with our in-laws throughout the States in a motorhome. Well, unfortunately, my brother-in-law, when the Belgrano was hit by the British with an Exocet missile, of course it took the Belgrano out. And my brother-in-law, who is just a kind person, I don't know why he would even make the statement, he should have thought, but he said, well, it took the British to do what the Japanese couldn't. Our father-in-law, my father-in-law, who was also a very nice person, didn't talk to him for 2 weeks.
Oh.
So, being on the destroyer and going to the many different countries, one of the neatest places at that particular time. Now, this is before freeways and such all over the world. And when we got down there, the King of Siam, who recently died, he was just a young man when we were there, he opened that country up to us. We were on a goodwill trip, as I say, and we, being a small ship, we were able to go up the river into Bangkok, where actually I went up on deck and I could have thrown stones to the side of the canal opening. That's how small it was. But they got all four of us up into the bay by Bangkok, and they opened the city to us pretty much. And we had free transportation. We could go on to the King's grounds. They opened that up for us. They opened the officers' swimming pool to all of the crew, not just the officers on board. And going across the equator to get there was also quite a thing. But there were just many, many good things to do. Adventures, yeah.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Yeah, it's just unbelievable what the military can offer you.
Oh, yes.
So.
It's there to be used if you want to use it. Granted, using an AR-15 or whatever is not an outside use normally, but there's so many other things, executive type things that you can use things for, and the military does offer a lot if you want to grab it and take it.
Right.
There.
Right.
All of the doctors, all of the positions I worked in were great positions. And as I say, this was all taught at the Naval Hospital. We had good nurses for training and everything going there. So I was going to show you also, I have plaques with
that's what I'm going
medals and
to
such.
take some pictures if we've got a little bit of time.
Yeah.
Okay.